Welcome everyone to our second webinar on applications of AI in legislation as a part of our AI for Legislation series. As a reminder, our competition is currently accepting submissions until July 31st. Our guest today, Karen Suhaka, is the founder of BillTrack50. Not only will she be presenting a lot of great information on legislative technology, but she's also providing her API for competitors to use for free for the duration of the competition. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll hand over the mic to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can kind of go through my deck here. Um, so thank you for the opportunity to present my thoughts on AI tools for legislation, a topic near and dear to my heart. So I am Karen Suhaka. I founded BillTrack50 back in 2011. And before that, I had two successful exits. So I'm the serial entrepreneur. And, I didn't know anything about legislation before I started this. So a lot of the things I say in the presentation about be your own customer, well, I didn't do it this time, but I did the other two times. Okay, so I have learned a lot and I have a lot that I would love to share. So let's dive in. This is what I intend to talk about. So I want to give you a little bit of a legislative process refresher, especially from the data point of view, just so that we're all on the same page about like how a bill becomes a law. And then I want to talk about how you can approach building legislative tools and some questions you might want to answer yourself as you kind of sort through different ideas and decide what you want to build. I'll explain what we built and how that's gone and the feedback we've had and some of the cautionary tales for things you might want to stay on top of that we learned the hard way. And then I'll offer just a few ideas in case you're still thinking. I have a couple different topics you might consider tackling. And then just a couple notes on being an entrepreneur, which just, if you love your idea and you want to make it into a business, just a couple of thoughts on that. And then we can open it up for any questions. And I am happy to also correspond after the fact. So if you're watching a recorded version of this, feel free to email me. All right, so the legislative process. The basics, of course, somebody has an idea. It might be a citizen or a legislator, but it also might be industry or a special interest. And they'll have an idea and then they'll take it to the legislator. And the legislator then takes it to a drafter. And the drafter is a professional that works for the legislature and knows the rules for like how bills have to be formatted and what words have to be included and how it all has to work together. And so they will help write the bill and they'll actually get it into the proper format. A few states actually make those drafts available for people to see what's being worked on. Most of them do not. But you can possibly get your hands on those drafts if that's data that you're interested in. And then when the bill is finished and the legislator is happy and it passes muster, it will be introduced. Now, the state legislatures are mostly only in session part-time. So most of them start in January, some in February, a couple later than that. And most of them wrap up in, say, May or June, and then they're done for the year. A few have quite a bit shorter sessions. Some meet only every other year, and some are so most of the legislatures are citizen legislatures. So the legislators only work, part of the year, and they have other jobs. A few are professional legislatures. So Congress, of course, they meet all year round. That's their job. A few states also have full-time year-round legislatures. So anyway, so the bill will get introduced, and if the state's not in session yet, it just kind of sits on a pile while we wait for the session to start when the bills can actually start their process. Those bills, lots of states will make available as a pre-file. So the bill's already in its final form. They know exactly, what it's going to look like when it gets introduced. And so lots of states will go ahead and publish those ahead of time so that people can get a head start looking at them. So that is data that we often have available. So right now it is April and most of the states are in session. And so most of the bills are just active right now. A few states are done. We probably won't see any more pre-files until about July when some of the states start showing what they're going to do for next year. So then once a bill is introduced, it gets read to the whole chamber. So it gets introduced in the House or it gets introduced in the Senate. and that will be the first chamber, the originating chamber. And then it gets sent to committee for consideration. Usually the committee will have hearings and people can come testify. In a perfect world, in regular order, this is how it goes. That testimony is often made available online. They might broadcast it live online, possibly. They might have minutes after the fact or summaries available after the fact. They might have it in the journal. So the information about the committee is possibly available. The committee will vote on if the bill is good and they think that it should pass, then they'll send it off to get voted on by everybody. They might think it needs to be amended, and then they will possibly change the bill and then vote on it. And then the changed version will go up. And so you'll have the version before the changes and after the changes that you'll be able to see. And then sometimes they say, we think this is not a good idea, and they won't pass it out of committee. And then it is very unusual for a bill the committee didn't like to then go on to get a vote. So that pretty much kills the bill in normal circumstances. So then it'll go to, if the bill passes out of the committee and they're happy with it, amended or unamended, it'll go for a vote and the whole chamber gets to vote. So the entire House or Assembly or the entire Senate. And then if they pass it through, it gets sent over. We call that crossing over to the other chamber. So if it was a House bill, it goes to the Senate and vice versa. And then same process goes to the, the votes are available. So the states all make that floor vote available. About half the states make the committee votes available. Almost all of the states, well, all of the states make the vote data available. A couple make it available in sort of a like scanned PDF format, but for like 48 of the states, they do good data that we can like consume and turn into numbers. And so that's nice. We do have the votes by and large. So then that data or the bill goes to the other chamber, again, committee, again, vote. Maybe they've amended it. If they amend it though, then after the final vote here, if it passes, we've got to go back to the original chamber to approve those changes, whatever the changes the second chamber made. And then off it goes to the president or the governor, depending if it's federal legislation or state legislation. And then the governor can sign it and then it becomes a law, or the governor can not sign it. And in some states, after a certain amount of time, it becomes a law. And in some states, after a certain amount of time, it's automatically vetoed. So it's called a pocket veto. And of course, the governor always has the option to actually veto it and say no. So if it gets vetoed or if there's a pocket veto, then it goes back to the legislature and they have a chance to decide they'd like to try to vote to overturn the veto, to override the veto. And so then those votes become available as well. So that is the process and kind of where the different data points are and where the data is easy to use and hard to use. One thing about the bill texts, most of the, like some of the states publish it in HTML, which is pretty nice and consumable. Some of them publish it as PDFs, which PDFs aren't data, but at least, you know, you can get the data out of there and work with it. So that is the picture of the process with an eye towards the data. Okay, but there's so many wrinkles and all the states are different. So in some of the states I mentioned have short sessions, long sessions. Some of them have 1 year session where if a bill isn't done by the end of the year, it's dead. Some of them have 2 year sessions where a bill gets an entire 2 years to get through the process. So over a 2 year cycle, we have about 250,000 bills. So that's a lot of bills, 250,000 bills. There's so much data. We've been doing this for about 10 years, so we have millions of bills in our system. You've got details about if it's a bill or a resolution. You've got whether, you know, it's a constitutional amendment. You've got just all these different little wrinkles. So depending on what your focus is going to be, you might need to learn a little bit about a detail of the process. And I'm happy to help you. And we have some resources on BillTrack50 to help you. Or what we've done at BillTrack50, we've attempted to figure out the lowest common denominator, like what all the states have in common by and large, and just present that much information with links out to get more details. So all the states are different, but we do our best to try to gather them all together into one sort of similar situation. All right, so that is the data side. Okay, so let's talk about how you're going to build a tool to deal with this legislative data. So first, what's the pain point that you're trying to solve? What is your idea? What do you think needs to be better, different? What information do you think people should have? What tools should they have? So once you've got an idea about what you think a pain point is, and ideally you have that pain point, ideally you would be a customer of this product, just makes it easier. You don't have to, but it does make it easier if you're trying to solve your own problem. So then once you've got that idea, you've got to figure out how many people have that problem. Is this just a niche thing that like 5 people in one organization have that problem, or is this like a pretty universal problem that lots of people have? If there's not a lot of people, that doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just changes what you might develop, how you would deploy it, how you would price it. So you've got to think ahead of time, like, is everybody going to want this? Then, you're going to need to do it a certain way. So think about how many people have that problem. And then once you've thought about those people who might have that problem that you're trying to solve, how are you going to reach those people? So if you can't identify and reach those people and let them know that there is a solution, you might as well not have the solution. Um, they say build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. That is not the case. Not really, not usually. So you've got to have some sort of idea for how you can find the people who want to use your product. If you have no idea how you would reach them, maybe you want to think about a different idea. And of course, can you actually solve their problem? So you've got to kind of understand what their needs are going to be and if is your solution actually going to address them. But I put that last because that's the most fun part, and that's like the part you're going to get excited about, but that's not the only part. So I wanted to highlight that you should probably think through these other things before you tuck into the actual programming and get started actually solving the problem. Because if you don't have answers to these other questions, you may get something great built that nobody ever uses, and that is heartbreaking. So I suggest you think about some of these other things before you get too far down the coding route. Okay, now approach to the data sources and challenges, which I alluded to a little bit. So for whatever tool, whatever solution you're going to try to create, what is going to be the data that is required for that? Where are you going to get that data? Does that data need to be kept up to date? So is it just something that's static and you can get it once and then you're good? Or is it something you're going to have to update every day, every week, every minute? So think about that and like how you would keep it updated too. What format is it in? Is that a format that you are prepared to deal with? Are you wanting to go with some structured data that will be nice and easy peasy? Or are you going to try to deal with the unstructured data, of which there is plenty in this legislative world? So think about that. And if you do want to deal with bill text or committee testimony or whatever, how are you going to approach that? I assume possibly with AI. And then how much does the data itself cost? So is there a cost to getting the data, either with time or with actual tools, or are you going to pay a vendor for the data? And we can suggest some vendors. So reach out to me if you like. I can tell you some places you can buy different sorts of data. And that's the data, but then there's also the AI tools. And so obviously you're going to need to think about what model you want to use. And you're going to want to consider the cost of that model, the strengths of that model. You might want to experiment with some different models to see what is good at solving your issue. We started with ChatGPT when we were doing our AI summaries. We were medium happy with them. It was very expensive. We switched over to Anthropic's Claude, and that has been more successful for us. Claude just did a better job with the summaries, and it was much cheaper. So definitely experiment and see like what model is going to be best for you. And then are you going to get a vector database? Are you going to be like trying to do something with the data in that direction? If so, are you going to try to use an open source one? Are you going to use a pay one? So think through a little bit what all those costs are going to be before you get too far down the road. And what user experience are you looking for? Are you looking for people to interact with the AI directly? Are you going to create something that they can just consume? So what road are you going to go down there? And then obviously that will inform your model and also your costs. You got to think about if the users are going to be submitting stuff, like who's paying for that kind of interaction. All right, so you've thought about all of that. You've got your idea, you've got your model, you have some idea about the data. Great. Then there's the ethical considerations, and you don't want to leave these to the last, right? Like think about this ahead of time. Oh, how I wish some people did that before we got to where we are right now. So how do you avoid bias? So how do you ensure transparency? You make sure people know, obviously, what part of your data is AI so they can take that into account. How do you assure accessibility, equity in your answers? How do you make sure that you're giving good answers and avoiding putting more misinformation out in the world? How are you going to do checks? Are you yourself going to review all of the results? Like, how are you going to even do that? Um, are there privacy considerations? Are you asking people for their names and addresses and zip codes? And are you going to stick that into an AI? Like, what are the privacy considerations? How are you going to be careful with that? How are you going to make sure that you aren't exposing anybody's data and that you're, not causing any trouble for your users? Are you going to try to be nonpartisan? And how are you going to make sure the AI is giving you nonpartisan answers? How are you going to make sure um, if you want to be nonpartisan, or are you going to go whole hog on one side or the other, which is valid, but decide that up front so that you can kind of build that into your testing. And are you going to provide human oversight? Who's going to do that? Is that going to be time intensive, expensive? Um, we certainly have a report button on our tool, which I'll show you, and we do get reports back from people, which is really helpful. Um, We've made some different choices. Obviously, everything we use is clearly labeled AI. We are not letting people interact with it, so they're not submitting anything back to us, which helps us with our privacy. And for misinformation, we just did tons of testing, and then we let people report in, especially, well, we'll get to that a little bit. But so you got to think through some of this stuff before you go too far down the road and realize like you've got yourself a problem. All right, so let me show you a little bit about what we did just to give you kind of a picture about the sorts of things that can be done. So this is BillTrack50. I am just in my account, so this is live. So what you do with BillTrack50 is you create a search and save it. So I have this search about AI in political campaigns. And so I've set up some query terms. Stuff about artificial intelligence with campaigns. Great. So then we database stuff. Here's your results. So we've got this synthetic media liability in elections. Great. So now I can click on this bill and it'll show me this bill. And this is how we've tried to boil it all down to a basic level. As I mentioned, we've got these AI summaries on all of the bills, and then report an AI issue so that if somebody sees one of these and it's either wrong or it's weird or it's partisan, people will report in and let us know, which is super helpful. I so appreciate that people do that. In addition to a bunch of SQL tests that we do for problems that we've seen regularly, not to mention all the testing to try to have good answers in the first place. Text of the bill, its journey through the legislative process. This one hasn't been voted on yet, but votes, links to documents, and so forth. The thing I really want to show you is this similar bills. So we will take the AI summary and we have vectorized it. We'll compare it to all the other AI summaries and tell you what bills across the country are like this one, which is great. So this gives people a picture of what's going on around the country on this one topic. So if you hear a bill that's happening in your state and you want to know, like in context, what's going on across the country, are we unique in this? Is this something that's trending and lots of people are doing it? Or if you hear about a bill in another state and you're curious, is your state doing this? You can also look up that bill and then come and see if your state is doing something similar. So this is kind of how we've deployed AI. We've got the summaries in there, but the point of the summaries, I mean, obviously they're useful, people can see them, but is so that we can do this vector math and figure out what bills are similar to other bills. And as you see, like these results are very much these same kind of topics, right? And it works quite well. It's pretty amazing, right? AI is the bomb. All right, so that is sort of how we have used it. So let's talk about some of the things that we learned in the process. Although the summaries are really quite good, sometimes they're quite bonkers. So they do sometimes, it's a little opinionated about a bill and what they're trying to do. And every now and then the summary really comes off a little too pro or against the idea. So that's partisan, and that, we try to deal with that. But also, we'll get very bizarre results coming out like this. Um, these that we this pattern we see not often, but like more than you'd think, and we're able to like find this and filter these out with SQL and just resubmit it and get a better. But then sometimes we get something like this where it starts out with a perfectly good, stopping a motor vehicle, which allows law enforcement, dating, photograph or identify, dating, license plate, dating, and then like dating law, dating. Okay, the first person who ran into this, we didn't identify this. This is not an obvious one. We could find this with a simple query. The person was a little bit alarmed, and they submitted it to us to review, and we got a little bit alarmed. This is like an alarming summary. So that is gonna happen, right? Like, who knows what this was and why this happened, but yeah, sometimes it's weird. So be prepared. And have a mechanism, and in this, like a report, a user reported it back to us. Yeah, so all of our testing and stuff, we got mostly good results, but you know it's stochastic. You're going to get weirdness. Okay, so that is what we learned and some of the ways that we dealt with it, in addition to lots of testing with different prompts and whatnot until we got it where we wanted. All right, so here are some possible ideas I had for things you could do. If you have an idea already, fantastic. If you're still kind of thinking about what would be fun to work on, maybe you want to predict if a bill will pass. Maybe you want to take a bill on a topic like voter ID or gun control or abortion or whatever, and decide, is this bill trying to make more of that thing or less of that thing? So like intent analysis or sentiment analysis, to try to help people figure out, because sometimes the names are deceptive and intentionally deceptive of a bill. And you don't know, like, is this bill actually pro this thing or anti this thing? Is it sneaky? So that could be helpful to the public. Obviously, nice plain language summaries of stuff, or of where it is in the process and what has to happen next, or whatever. Anything you can make to help simplify and clarify like what's going on, I think people will appreciate. I mentioned that bills get amended, like coming out of a committee. What's the impact of that amendment? Or I have down here full history of the law. If the bill passes, like what's the impact of this bill on the law that it just changed? Um, Stakeholder identification. So you've got a bill about a certain topic. Maybe it would be interesting to figure out what kinds of people this is going to impact. Who are the stakeholders in this conversation? It might be obvious that it is doctors, but maybe it's also parents, right? So that's interesting, and then people can put themselves into groups, and you can say, hey, here's the bills that might impact you. You could look for model bills. So industry or special interests might suggest a bill and try to get it passed across the entire country. And so identifying those model bills is pretty interesting. Lots of journalists are into that. But if you've got like something that's trending and you start seeing it pop up everywhere, it's really interesting to try to figure out like where that came from. So BillTrack50 in our very early days, one of our very first customers was a company called B Labs, and they had this idea for a B Corp, a benefit corp. So you could be a profit or nonprofit corporation, and they were suggesting, well, why not have both as your bottom line, and how would you balance those? And so they wanted to get bills passed in all the states that let you form as a benefit corp. And so I got to watch as that bill like spread and got passed, and it is very exciting. So model bills, very interesting, and trying to figure out who's behind them could be quite illuminating. Maybe trend analysis of different topics, like watch as same-sex marriage got legalized, as like different marijuana got legalized, like watch that trend analysis so that you can maybe think about how the next thing is gonna like sweep across the country and see what kinds of things are there. Trying to help somebody figure out if their legislator is voting the way they would vote. Do they match their values? Talked about the history of a law, but like what are the different changes a law has gone through, and what does that tell us? Or whatever tools you wish you had access to. So those are just some ideas I throw out to you. Hopefully, get the old bean fired up. Okay, real quick about being an entrepreneur, and I You guys might know tons already. I don't want to talk down to anybody or say anything you already know, but in case you've not started a business before and don't know too much about it, getting your first paying customer, so getting from 0 to 1, and it not being like a friend of yours or your mom, but an absolute stranger gives you money for your thing. That is your goal. Uh, you want to create the smallest thing that somebody would pay for and get that out there. So, of your idea, what is the absolute most important nugget, middle important core part of that that would be enough for someone to pay for? So, that is called your minimum viable product. And by starting there and not getting all the bells and whistles and all the things you can think of and all the extra stuff, but just like what is the very least amount of your idea you could implement that someone would actually pay for, then that lets you get it in front of people. And it doesn't have to be paid for. It can just be like put it in the app store. What would people download and actually use, right? So what would actually be useful? If you can get that out, then you can get feedback and then you can find out what of the bells and whistles you had in your head would actually be useful to people. And then they can guide your development. So as I mentioned, I didn't have much of I wasn't a customer of LegiNation. I'm a math and physics person, and my first two companies had to do more with that. Uh, but when I started this, I got my basic idea out there, and then I've been guided by customer feedback, and that works great. So that's just a suggestion to get to your first customer, like get the smallest thing out you can, and then go with what people suggest and think. As that is successful, you're going to need a team. So you might have certain strengths. You might be a great coder. You might be great at organizing things. You might be great at raising money, marketing, doing the books, whatever. You're going to need all of those things to happen. So if there's any gaps in your personal skills, then you are going to need to build a team. And in my experience, just throwing this out as something I have learned over the years of several companies and hiring and firing lots of people, there is a minimum bar that people have to be able to do your job. So you need a coder who's at least this good, or you need a marketer who's at least this good. But after that, you've got your people who met that bar. Deciding between them is not necessarily finding the best coder, but the coder who might fit into your organization the best. So we were talking about profit or nonprofit or a balance. You're going to want someone who's kind of on the same page as you. Or do you want to be careful and get stuff out that's perfect? Or do you want to move fast and break things? Or somewhere on that spectrum, you're going to want people who are kind of similar to you and matches your company culture as you start to build up your culture. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about. Like, what kind of company are you? Are you high touch customer service, or is it all just automated? Or is it just going to be AI chatbots or what have you? So you kind of need to get people of a similar mind, and that is going to work, in my experience, better than picking the absolute best skills. You're going to want to find people who are going to fit into your culture and your organization. And if you can get some processes in place early about how you're going to do things in your company and how we do things here, that will also serve you well. So that is important when you're building your team. Just my thoughts. And then finally, if you're going to raise money, there's smart money and there's dumb money. And so dumb money might be friends and family, nothing against your family, but they might be people who aren't in that industry or don't have a huge interest in your thing, or they're just believe in you, right? And that's great. So that's money that you can use to build your team to do your stuff. But then there's smart money, people in the industry or people who have that problem or potential customers who want your solution to exist. They might have a lot of thoughts and experiences and networking and people they can introduce you to, which is great if you need that. So if you don't need that or their advice is bad, then you're in a ticklish situation. So when you're considering smart money, make sure that you guys are compatible and that their advice and help will be welcome and actually helpful. Be a little judicious about that. Nothing worse than getting somebody who's going to give you money but then tell you what to do when you don't think they're right. But yeah, so just some thoughts ahead of raising capital. Okay, so those are tiny little tips about being an entrepreneur. Possibly nothing you didn't know, but there we are. Finish on an inspirational quote. Can't beat a little Henry Ford for some world-changing ideas. All right, so that's my presentation. Hopefully there's a little bit in there that was helpful to you. Again, I'm Karen. You're welcome to drop me a note. I'm Karen at LegiNation.com. I would be happy to provide you access to BillTrack50 and to our API. And our API does include all of the AI summaries. So if you want to start with those summaries already generated for you and go from there, match it up with any of the other data, vote data or legislator data or whatever, happy to try to help you with that for the length of the competition. And there's also some resources in BillTrack50 that you can explore about the legislative process in each state and stuff like that. And yeah, or if you have any other questions, there's anything I can do to help. So Cynthia, any closing thoughts from you? I'm going to go ahead and stop my share.
Yeah, there's one question from the audience, I think in the chat box. And so maybe I can try to read it out. And so here's a, and what are the typical users for this sort of software?
Yeah. So I can speak to BillTrack50 about what kinds of people are interested in tracking legislation and who is kind of using our AI tools. So a big portion of our users, since we track all 50 states, are trade associations who are interested in what's going on across the country. And so they'll want to, like, if they see something coming, they want to see what other states are going to do that. So that is a typical user for our software. Also, big companies that operate in lots of states and need to follow the laws in lots of states, and the laws can sure vary a lot. So it's real helpful for them to have a way to kind of keep up with that. So those are like some of our customers. You would think lobbyists, but we do have competitors in the space, and some other people have built tools that are a little bit better for lobbyists. Where more business, trade associations, or social organizations, like I mentioned, B Corp, or lots of LGBT groups and pro-gun, anti-gun, pro-vax, anti-vax, like all that kind of thing. Lots of customers like that who are hoping to like get an idea across several states.
It looks like there's a bit of a follow-up. Is it all business, nonprofits, government, or are there consumer use cases as well?
Thank you for that question. So I should have mentioned BillTrack50, we make free for anybody to come and use and look up bills and read bills and look for similar bills. That is all for free because we are hoping that by making this all available that we can help people know what's really happening and sort of try to fight misinformation with information. So from our point of view, we just provide that as a free service. However, we did have somebody build a BillTrack50 app based on our API, and he has been able to create some value add features that people do pay for in the App Store. And so that is going to be like taking notes and saving some stuff and how you share stuff across an organization and pushing alerts and stuff like that. So like a couple little add-ons, and that's going pretty well for him. So there are definitely like consumer facing stuff. It's a little bit tricky because people think, and they're not wrong, that they should absolutely have access to this information for free. This is the lifeblood of our democracy. And everybody, like as citizens, we have a duty to try to participate in the process, which is obviously voting. That's the least we should all do. But being aware of what your state is doing, which is going to impact you, if they're passing a bill in your industry, like you should probably let your legislator know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Like where you have expertise, as I mentioned, a lot of the legislators are part-time. They don't have that much staff. Like that is actually helpful for you to share. So anyway, it's hard to get people to pay for this, but they will. Not tons, but some. And so BillTrack50, like we're selling it to professionals, as I mentioned, it's a $5,000 subscription, right? So that's what we do. We're not the most expensive product in the market. So like for people who are tracking for a professional reason, like we save them a ton of time, and so they'll pay us. From the consumer side, it's a little harder, but not impossible. People might pay a little bit for, say, an app so that they can track and get information and send alerts to their friends and that sort of thing. We have seen that be successful too.
Thank you for the questions, Chung. I actually
Yeah.
wanted to add for you, if you're interested in consumer use, in our first webinar, we did have a speaker who was more geared toward like small businesses and independent consumers. You might want to check that one out. Granted, it's not exactly the same business model, as Karen's bill tracking. It's more about understanding legal documents and verbiage. But there can still be something to be gleaned, I think, about like the differences in business models and how to cater to different audiences. Um, with that, for closing remarks, does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Like, Karen, I like your slides very much. Maybe the first question is, do you mind sharing slides with us?
Happy to share the deck.
Okay, we will post on our website, on Twitter, let the world know wonderful slides we just saw today. Yeah, I love them a lot. And so, yeah, another thing, like in terms of like project ideas, and actually, when you were talking through them, my brain kind of background processing several ideas, and one idea, and I was having like what if we can have some kind of leaderboard for all the laws, maybe for each state, and we rank them from the best to the worst, or the worst to the best, depending on how you want to sort them. Would that be useful for citizens or lawmakers? And then they can, maybe for good laws, we just keep them. But the thing that I think right now, for any organization or country or state, when they are in like 100 years, you accumulate a lot of regulation laws. And we do need to regularly kind of clean up some like old or bad things. And so I will have this idea. If I had money, somebody found me, I may just create leaderboards of the worst to best laws and ask the lawmakers, okay, try to get rid of top 10 worst laws. Would that be something useful, interesting? Just free chatting. So
I think that would be super fun, but
okay.
also useful to say, like, these are outdated, guys. And the problem with outdated laws is they can come back and get misused. And so, like, we should get that all cleaned up. And there's no reason we can't. And that would be a great use for AI, is to, like, to go through all of that and try to identify some of the most outdated stuff, and then have a leaderboard and have voting and stuff, and say, like, what we think you should fix first. I love that. That'd be great.
Okay, that's one idea I was having. So a lot of things over the weekend, I was checking like, okay, and there must be some people doing all the kind of financial analysis for our Congress, right? But still, we're as a nation, we are deep in debt. So what's going on? So I was looking at this kind of office called the Congressional Budget Office, something like that. I could be wrong. They actually, for each bill, they already do some kind of financial analysis and say, if you do this, we will be kind of having more deficits or run this trouble, that trouble. But the Congress, quite often, they don't care. they just ignore the CBO's analysis and pass many laws anyway. So that's partially the reason we are in this big trouble as a nation, like really deep in debt. People seriously don't care about that. Right.
Governments aren't companies. They don't run the same way. Now, the states do have to balance their budgets, so they publish the fiscal notes so that you can see what the fiscal impact of a bill will be. But Congress, yeah, they publish them, but then sometimes.
Yeah, but they have like they can always like borrow money from the world, and also they have this Federal Reserve to essentially print out new money out of thin air. So that's very bad for for citizens, I think. Anyway, and I was thinking about how to fix the system. So the Congress will actually have some kind of fiscal kind of red tape. They have to stay within the bounds, but I don't know. Yeah, it's just kind of. I was just curious if you ever thought about this kind of how to prevent the USA going and bankrupt. This kind of issue.
Well, I'm just gonna say opinions differ. But I have seen some interesting ideas where people try to build an app where you try to balance the budget and you're like, okay, you can pay the teachers more, but then you might have to close the parks. And that can be very
Oh,
illuminating for people to understand like what the balances are and maybe why their government is making the choices they have to make.
mhm,
So at the state level, right, smaller dollar value. I mean, some states are obviously enormous, but still smaller than the federal government, but generally keep a balanced budget. And so that does offer a lot of opportunities to dig into, and that there's also some stuff there you could definitely work on in places we might be useful.
mhm. Okay, yeah, that's good. And another thing, little bit kind of selfish question too. I have like two boys. We live in Silicon Valley. I really want them to try something like starting a company, become billionaire, those kind of things. And one of them actually is into this debate thing, and he already started some kind of website using AI and to act as a kind of two sides of the same bill, then debate around that. But I don't know, like you already mentioned that like for this sort of software, it's very hard to get kind of paying customers. Like for like a younger generations, if they are into this kind of making better laws and using AI, how they can start some kind of profitable businesses out of this kind of big direction, because we are not really doing other fancy things like generating images or videos. But I do see the value, but I just don't know what's the path to get profitable for younger people.
Right. Well, we've taken the dual bottom line approach, right? So we very much want this information to be out and for everyone to have access to it and be able to share it. We make it really easy to share on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. But also, like, we need to fund that. And so we also have a paid version that has extra tools that really only professionals would need, with alerts and things like, so they get alerted as soon as a bill comes or gets voted on or whatever. So we just sort of took the core item and like a free version and a paid version. And often like the freemium model is we're trying to move free customers over to be paid customers, but that's not our model because citizens aren't going to become paid customers by and large, and we're not trying to tempt them into that. We want them to have this information, and the way we do that is by getting companies to pay us. So yeah, there is
Okay.
ways to do it without having to get consumers to pay money. Is if you can come up with a product that a deluxe version would pay for the free version for citizens, then great. Like that's the approach we took.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good. So, and yeah, if I'm not kind of tired of my questions, I want to shoot maybe another one. So then I think you heard about it. We are organizing this AI for legislation project, and it's totally non-profit project. We want to attract especially younger generations, even high school students. Of course, college students are most welcome. And so how to kind of reach more those kind of potential developers. And we tried many ways, and I want to hear like your opinion. What you would do if you were running this kind of project? How would you try? What would you want to try to attract more submission of this thing? So, do you have any thoughts about this?
Um, huh. Well, I haven't really given that any thought. I'd be happy to give it some thought and share some ideas with you, but you'd have to let me think about it.
Okay, okay, take your time whenever you have some time. And so, okay, I will be quiet for a little bit. So, Cynthia, and do you have other things on your agenda?
For me, on the agenda, no. Um,
Yeah, maybe Karen, if you have any questions to ask, just ask. Yeah.
Oh, I asked
there
them
is
all before
actually
we
another
started.
question from Chung, which is quite an interesting one, actually, about sales and marketing. So perhaps Karen could tell us a little bit about how BillTrack50 gets customers. What kind of sales and marketing do you do?
Right. So we just hope they'll find us. So we've actually, um, one thing I didn't mention, I don't think, is that we create these widgets that people can put on their website. So once we manage to go from 0 to 1 and get some paying customers, luckily some of our very early customers were, I went to trade shows, I met a couple people and managed to convince them to try BillTrack50. And they were quite large companies that you have heard of, which was very lucky for me. Somehow we managed to get the Department of Defense to buy us too, and use, anyway, whatever. So there's a lot of, like, we got lucky in the early days, which I highly recommend. A little bit of luck goes a long way. But then we have widgets that people can put on their website. So a trade association can say, hey, here's all the bills. And then we've got a map that's interactive and people can click and see the bills in their state and all of that. And so then that causes other people to say, hey, I want one of those. And so that has been very helpful to us. So our customers are one of our best ways of getting the message out, because by nature of our product, they're trying to broadcast these bills. They're trying to get this information out to the world. And so we ride along with that. So they get to say, hey, these bills are great, or these bills are terrible, but also this is BillTrack50. So that works well for us. Google AdWords has worked for us till now. Obviously, things are changing very fast with AI, so I don't know. I think that Cynthia found me by asking an AI, so that's pretty cool. So I'm not quite sure, like, that is brand new about how to market in the AI engines. A couple people, like, are trying to work on business models around that, so that might be interesting in the future. And the way that I got here, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years, might not be as available to others in the future. But yeah, AdWords, big help to us. And then word of mouth, obviously very important. And having a product that automatically pitches itself, because people are putting widgets that go to BillTrack50 on their website, has been really good. And also gave us a lot of Google juice, so that when people Google a bill, often they'll find a BillTrack50 link and then come read the bill on our website. And so that's real helpful. So getting some partners like Ballotpedia, who put our widgets on every single legislator page, right, that gave us a lot of juice. So if you can find some partners to work with, that is good too. But yeah, we've tried to keep it pretty affordable so that we can run it all and keep our prices reasonable and still have the ability to provide the free service. So yeah, we don't spend as much money on marketing as I think a lot of our competitors do.
Oh, wonderful. Again, any questions for us? Feel free, Stephen, Karen, or the audience. Okay, maybe that's it.
Yeah, seems like we had some pretty good discussion. I'm not sure. I think on your last note, I also wanted to add, like, I did some asking the AI chatbots, and I know Chunhua, you also asked them a lot of things. And in multiple cases of our questions, BillTrack50 or LegiNation came up. So I think there's a lot to be gained from the new era, like AI search engine optimization. That's probably going to be the biggest thing for marketing in the future, in my opinion.
I
And
agree.
with yeah, thank you for all of your insights today and for the slide deck. That was a beautiful presentation. And thank you to our audience for being here today. I don't have any ending remarks. I don't know if Chunhua wants to add anything about the AI for legislation competition before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think again, and my name is Chunhua Liao. I'm the president and also co-founder of our foundation, Silicon Valley Charity Association Foundation, and we are running this wonderful AI for legislation project. Welcome everybody in USA to submit an open source public domain software solutions using AI to facilitate citizens participate in legislative processes and understanding bills and showing support or opposing them or gathering people around, all sorts of things. And so we want to make a difference And so please join us. And right now you don't have to know how to program with AI because there's something called a vibe coding. You just tell AI what you want, they just code for you. So it's a wonderful time to try your crazy ideas, and we will have wonderful judges. I think including Kevin and some other speakers down the road. So to judge your project, and we have like at least $10,000 US kind of award for the top ranked projects. So spread the word and join us. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was a good conclusion for the competition. If you're interested, please don't forget to email info@svcaf.org with your project pitch. Of course, that's optional, but it'll give us a good idea to how many competitors there are and kind of the scope of our competition as a whole, as well as maybe like the judges can kind of prepare themselves for what they should be evaluating on. But with that, thank you so much for coming, everybody. We'll see you next month, hopefully.
Okay. Thank you.